Good morning, Namaskar, and welcome to StudyIQ IAS English. My name is Bhuvan, and I welcome you to our daily news analysis program, The Editorial Edge. The last week, the weekend that just went by, is of immense significance. If you're preparing for the civil services examination, okay, the G20 summit culminated, and a lot of talking points have originated, a lot of focus areas that have now emerged for us, all the students as well as the educators alike. Okay, and so we will take a look at one of the most important outcomes of the G20 summit. The potential possibly opposition, an alternative that has been put forward to the Belt and Road Initiative. So it's going to be of extreme importance that we understand not just say the basic facts around this particular alternative project, but also seek to understand the geopolitical consequences, okay, the trade and commerce consequences, and whether it is indeed the first step in what you're looking at as an African route also that will be created in the near future. Okay, good morning, Coder. How are you? Welcome. Okay, so that's going to be our first agenda. We'll take a look at the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. Okay, thereafter, number 2, we'll take a look at the Konark Wheel. The Prime Minister was, he was there in the G20 summit, and he was receiving all the dignitaries, the guests, in front of the Konark Wheel. Okay, there was also the Nalanda ruins that was there in one of the photos. But for today, we'll take a look at the Konark Wheel. Smita, good morning. Good morning. Okay, and third, well, if you have been following the G20 summit, a lot of bonhomie was observed, say, between the Italian Prime Minister, the American President, the different dignitaries that were here in New Delhi. However, what was conspicuous was, say, the cold shoulder that was given to the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. Okay, so much so that unfortunately his aircraft, as newspaper reports are now mentioning, it has glitched. He's still in India. Okay, so it's a sequence of, say, a failed trip for him. So we'll understand what is the primary issue that comes in the India-Canada relationship, and we'll also take a look at the Press Information Bureau release, one of the most coldest pieces of a release that has been put forward by the government of India in the recent times. Okay, so that is a good opportunity for us to quickly go ahead and take a look at the India-Canada relationship and what are the points of contentions really. Okay, your neighbor Jerin, good morning guys, thank you for joining. Right, let's begin then. So this is my Instagram channel, guys. Or as always, before I begin, this is my daily ritual. I inform you of my Instagram channel, my email ID, as well as the Telegram channel, where you will find the PDF of this lecture uploaded at around noon. Okay, and so here on what I am doing, a slight change. Normally what I do is I begin the whole program or the segment by first looking at the questions of the last class and the individuals who have answered correctly. Well, that has been slightly shifted. I'm going to do that at the end of this class. Okay, just for today, no questions. We are going to focus on the understanding. The questions shall follow later. Right? Okay, let's get started. So this is the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, and memorandum of understanding was signed. Okay, and what you're looking at here is India, and what you're looking at is eventually India is looking to get connected to Europe, and at the same time you're also looking at the African area that is now within reach. Okay, we have discussed in the past, say, Africa is the new playground of the major world powers. However, for this discussion, let's focus on the economic corridor that has been proposed. Okay, so what you're looking at, a new connectivity corridor that will integrate 2 continents, Asia and Europe. Now, what are the countries? Saudi, European Union, obviously India, UAE, France, Germany, Italy, and the United States. Now, what is the whole point of this corridor, you might ask? Okay, up until now, the norm was that, say, the Belt and Road Initiative, the flagship project of the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping, well, that was the only player in the market, right? With the emergence of the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, what you're looking at is that all of these countries are now looking to circumvent the areas of contention. Now, what are the areas of contention? Straight away, you're looking at, say, Pakistan and Afghanistan that are not included and are essentially being circumvented through the IMEEC. Okay, so the combined GDP, as you look at it, 47 trillion US dollars, half of the world's GDP. Now, do you realize this? If these countries have come together, it has got to be with a purpose. We'll understand the purpose also, but please understand this here. This whole project, okay, you are looking at shipping, you're looking at rail, you're looking at road. All three are part of this initiative. Okay, so you are going to have countries now, the partner countries in this, they will be developing their own infrastructure in line with the global best practices, the global norms, okay, with the sole intention, the objective of connectivity, boosting trade and commerce, right? And as you must know by now, fashioning resilient supply chains. Post-COVID-19 pandemic, that has been one of the primary areas of contention, that your supply chains should not be, say, compromised in a time of crisis. That is the whole point of the IMEEC, right? So the rail and shipping corridor is a part of the Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment, the PGII, which is a collaborative effort of the G7 nations. So here is an MCQ point for you, right? So this is under the aegis of the PGII, and the G7 nations have come together on the platform of G20 now to go ahead and propose the IMEEC. Okay, so let's look at the partner countries and the whole facts around this case now, very quickly. So the IMEEC recognizes the need for global connectivity. Okay, global connectivity, creation of supply chains that are now resilient. Okay, and will deliver the creation or deliver the goods through the creation of two corridors. So let's go back to the map now. First corridor you are looking at is going to connect the Mundra port of India, and you are going to go ahead and say connect up till the Haifa port of Israel. Okay. Thereafter, you go ahead and cross the Mediterranean, and you find yourself connected to the Piraeus area, which is in Greece, just Mediterranean. Okay. And that gives you the entry point to Europe. Right? Up until now, if you had to go ahead and say trade with Europe, there was no singular line of, say, a supply chain. You had to go and fashion different routes that would be used for this trading purpose. At the same time, an aware student will be able to catch that with India, recently you had the Indian Prime Minister who visited Greece after 40 years, right? So you must understand by now that the basics of the IMEEC were already put in place, which is why you had the visit of the Prime Minister to Greece, because Greece, my friends, is a very important part of this whole project. You look at the port of Piraeus, right? So again, if you look at, say, Greece, Bulbul, good morning. Ruby, good morning. Thanks for joining, guys. So you have, say, the Aegean Sea, okay? So let's look at Greece now, very quickly. So if this is supposed to be Greece, okay, this is where Piraeus is. Here you have the Aegean Sea. Okay, here you have the Mediterranean, right? Can someone tell me which? The Ionian Sea, right? So you have these particular bodies. India now looking to go ahead and connect straight to Greece by first traversing up until, say, Haifa, which is again controlled by an Indian company. Then you go ahead, get entry, cross the Mediterranean, go into Greece. Piraeus, again controlled by an Indian company. And at the same time, the Mundra port here is obviously ours. Okay, so let's look at the other facets of it. The Eastern Corridor. Now, India gets connected to the Arabian Gulf. The Northern Corridor binds the Arabian Gulf to Europe. The key points that you should note now. The East Corridor will link the Indian port of Mundra on the west coast to the Fujairah port, and then using the railroad via Saudi Arabia and Jordan to go ahead to the Israeli port of Haifa. This is the first part of the project, the Eastern Corridor. Once you have reached Haifa, this is where Haifa is, the Israeli port of Haifa. Thereafter, the whole focus is on crossing the Mediterranean. The west coast thereafter from Haifa, you're looking at the goods reaching various ports like Marseille in France and other ports in Italy and Greece. The Greece port, the key port here being Piraeus. Okay. You're also looking at alternative investments now. Now, like I told you, each country is responsible for the creation of the infrastructure within their, say, a sovereign territory. Okay, but that infrastructure that will be so created has to be of a certain benchmark. So that will be taken care of under the aegis of this project. At the same time, you're looking at investments in cables, digital networks, and clean hydrogen that is a part of this project. Okay, now please understand this, that the IMEEC is not to be understood as say an ideological grouping. Say for example, the organization for OIC, okay, the Islamic Cooperation Organization. Well, that is an ideological grouping. It is also not to be understood as a security grouping. For example, the Quad, right? So Quad would be understood as a security alliance, right? For example, right now we know, say the G20 is a group of bodies that initially came together to address economic issues. Now it addresses environmental issues and security issues. The ambit has now so increased. However, the IMEEC is just a project. It is neither an ideological grouping nor a security alliance. There is the learning for you. Shekhar, good morning. Welcome guys. Thank you for joining. Okay. So now why is this required? And this is straight from the horse's mouth. Okay. So first, let's look at the point of the project. Number one, increasing prosperity among the countries involved through the increased flow of energy and digital communications. At the same time, you're looking at those countries that have hitherto been, say, untouched by the creation of infrastructure bit. Now they will be served by the IMEEC. At the same time, you're looking at turning the temperature down on the turbulence and insecurity coming out of the Middle East. Recently, you have seen, say, that a lot of, say, bridge building has been done in the Middle East. Countries that were not engaging, say, earlier are now willing to go ahead and engage with each other. The whole concept of, say, multilateral development and multipolar world, now that is coming up. And that is happening why? Because eventually, countries have now realized that supply chains are important and critical for their economic health. And that, say, relying on one particular company or one particular, say, country is neither feasible nor advisable. Okay, so let's look at whether this whole allegation or this concept of the IMEEC, okay, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, whether it is directly going to challenge the Belt and Road Initiative. Okay, so let's look at the points that I have for you. Now, many might consider this, that it is a response to the Chinese Premier's project, the BRI, a fair assumption to make. Okay, and what is the whole point of, what are the criticisms, my dear students, when we discuss the BRI? Okay, many in fact. So let's look at the criticisms. Firstly, we are looking at infrastructure that the Chinese build, using Chinese companies, using Chinese labor, with Chinese money, which eventually serves Chinese interests, right? So you might ask, how was that possible? What was the rest of the world doing? Now, what is the Chinese model? They go ahead and offer loans at those areas, say, where the IMFs and the World Banks are not willing to go ahead and engage. Or if they are willing to engage, they will ask for concessions. The Chinese don't ask for concessions until the money is now transacted. After the money has so been transacted, for example, the Sri Lankan example or the Montenegro example, you find that the country is now trapped in a whirlpool of, say, debt that it finds impossible to come out of that whirlpool. That served China well up until now. Why? Because again, most of the other countries did not have the resources or were not aligned to each other to go ahead and counter China. With the emergence of the IMEEC, you find that, well, that problem is now being taken care of. Okay, so let's look at it. The Chinese model was premised to expand China's commercial footprint by offering to build infrastructure that connects the mainland to Europe. But the BRI's actions have always been, say, criticized. You know, it is often likened to a game or a roulette where the house always wins. Okay, so it's a condition in which if you go ahead and engage with the Chinese, you are not going to benefit in either way. It's the Chinese who will always win in the Belt and Road Initiative and the debts and the money that comes along with it. Okay, so the creation of an alternative connectivity infrastructure through the IMEC will counter the BRI both strategically and commercially. Now, a lot of this explains also, say, the Chinese premier's absence at the G20 summit. Okay, that India had already gone ahead and engaged with Greece insofar as the finalization of the IMEC is concerned. Okay, well, that would have sent a message across to the Chinese premier, which is why Xi Jinping did not make his availability in New Delhi, right? You also had, say, the Chinese premier who was conspicuous by his absence insofar as the creation of the IMEC is concerned, right? Correct, Bulbul, G21, right? Okay, so that is the IMEC. Now, the points that you should note from here. Number one, obviously you're going to go ahead and look at the Greece map first. Okay, so the Ionian Sea, the Aegean Sea, okay, you're looking at, say, the Mediterranean, right? You're also looking at the other islands, okay? You have a Sea of Crete. So again, if you're appearing for next year, mapping these would be a first start to understanding the IMEC, right? You're also looking at, say, the hard choices now that, say, Turkey will have to make. Up until now, Turkey was quite pally with, say, China and, say, Russia, okay? That they were a conduit for BRI. However, with the emergence of the IMEC, Turkey also has a hard choice to make, okay? So that is the first discussion that I had for you, the most historic announcement that came out of the New Delhi summit, the creation of the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. That completes the first topic that I had for you. Now, before I go forward, my dear students, well, this closes this evening, okay? This evening, the P2I initiative, one of the final batches, in fact, okay? And you're looking at the morning batch that is now beginning, well, just in a couple of hours from now, the orientation class is going to happen. So if you have not signed up so far, or if you're still thinking whether I should not, well, go ahead, quickly take a look at the course deliverables, look at the faculty profiles, and will understand that this is the complete project, you know. Just like, say, the IMEC is focused on the holistic development of all the countries that are associated with it, the P2I is to do with the holistic understanding of concepts that are to be given to a student so as to enable him or her to have a fair chance at cracking the UPSC examination in 2024. Okay, so go ahead, quickly sign up for this, and when you do, use the code BALIVE, as that assures you a very good discount, and plus, well, we get to study together. So that's going to be a lot of fun, right? Okay, Konark Wheel. Yes, if you are following the news in the weekend, over the past weekend, Konark Wheel was a center of attention. You had, say, Prime Minister Modi and President Biden who were pictured in front of the Konark Wheel. Okay, Prime Minister taking some time out to explain to him what Konark Wheel is all about. So as students, let's look at it. Okay, number one, the Konark Wheel took form under King Narasimhadev I, his reign in the 13th century, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Now, obviously, this whole temple is to sun god, and this wheel also, you will see, is in that whole fashioning of, say, a tribute to the sun god. So let's understand this one. The sun temple, first designed in the shape of a huge chariot drawn by 7 mighty horses on 12 pairs of gorgeously decorated wheels. Now, each of these wheels, my students, if you look at it, here is the important part for you. These wheels number 16, total of them are 16 in number. Okay, the spokes, in fact, are 16 in number, and they have a larger spoke, a smaller spoke. Between these spokes, you have 30 of beads. 30 beads are present. Now, you might ask me, so what's the consequence of this? Essentially, what you're looking at is that through a wheel, you can go ahead and look at and figure out the time of the day also. So imagine this. At your home, you have a clock, a wall clock. Okay. The same fashioning is done on the wheel. Okay. So let's look at it. The Konark Wheel has 8 wider spokes, 8 thinner spokes. Now, the distance between, say, the 2 wider spokes. So let's look at it. Here is your wider spoke. Here is your wider spoke. The distance between them of 180 minutes. Okay. Now, the thinner spoke and the thinner spoke. The distance between them, 90 minutes. At the same time, you have 30 beads that are between one wider spoke and one thin spoke. And that is to do with 3 minutes each. Do you realize this? So, essentially, looking at the sun's position, you are going to go ahead and figure out the time of the day depending on the shadow that it creates. This is one of the key characteristics of the Konark Wheel, my friends. Okay. Okay. Pranjul, good morning. Good morning. Welcome. Welcome. Okay. So please understand this again, because from the examination perspective, here is a question for you. That does the Konark Wheel give me the time of the day depending on what? So your answer should be that yes, Konark Wheel does give me the time of the day, and the shadow so created by the sun is used to figure out the time of the day. And how is the time of the day calculated? By the shadow created between the spokes. The larger spoke, the smaller spoke, the distance between them, the beads, all of them together give me a fair indication of the time of the day. In fact, an exact indication of the time of the day. And that is the basic characteristic of the Konark Wheel. Alright, so let's look at it one by one. 16 spokes, as I told you, they represent Indian ancient wisdom, advanced civilization and architectural prowess. And the spinning motion of the wheel, it signifies concepts like time, progress and change. That the cycle of birth and rebirth, of say growing and eventually perishing, that is signified by the Konark Wheel. That time is eternal. Life is not eternal. Time is. That is the whole point of the Konark Wheel, my friends. Okay, so have a look at this. Like I told you, 8 wider spokes. These are your wider spokes. Okay, and then you have the smaller spokes. Okay, so the distance between the 2 wider spokes, as I told you, 180 minutes. The distance between the 2 thinning spokes, 90 minutes. And 30 beads between one wider spoke to the next thinner spoke, each bead representing 3 minutes, right? So the sundial shows time in the anti-clockwise, right? And thus the center wider spoke, this one essentially represents 12 midnight, just like our wall clock. So now you can understand the technology that was so developed, or the understanding of time that was say present during King Narasimhadev I's reign. Okay, very, very important concept, and a lot of potential MCQs that can arise out of this. So I would really advise my students to have a look at it very, very carefully, right? So that was the Konark Wheel and how it is used to calculate time. The significance of this, why? Because again, you had this historic photo taken in front of the Konark Wheel, a replica of it that was put at the Bharata Mandapam in New Delhi. Okay, right? So that was the Konark Wheel, my friends. If you have understood the topic, quickly go ahead and leave me a like. I would really appreciate that. And well, I would also request you to consider sharing this class with those of your friends whom you think they may benefit out of this class. Okay, it would be of immense help to me. And once again, may I request you, please leave me a like if you understood the 2 topics, the IMEEC and the Konark Wheel. Going forward now, India-Canada relations. Now, it is one of the most coldest press releases in recent time. And I'm saying this because, well, it is my job to read press releases that come out of the government of India for the benefit of my students. Okay, so let's look at it now. Besides obviously say the usual jibber jabber that comes, that we have shared values of this and that, okay, that's understood. But here you go, and this is the part that you should focus on. Okay, and let's look at it. The Prime Minister conveyed our strong concerns about continuing anti-India activities of extremist elements in Canada. They are promoting secessionism and inciting violence against Indian diplomats, damaging diplomatic premises, threatening the Indian community in Canada, places of worship, the nexus of such forces with organized crime. Bear in mind, this is an official release of the Government of India. And if you were following the news this weekend, you must have seen a lot of warmth was observed, say, between the Indian Prime Minister and the host of the other dignitaries that were present. Okay, you had bilaterals which was given to the American president, right? The Italian Prime Minister. All of these, you had the bilaterals, which means specific conversations that went on for a period of time. In comparison, the Canadian Prime Minister was just offered a pull aside, which is essentially a terse, brief, 5 to 10 minute conversation. What was the conversation centered around? Now we know, okay, that the Indian government has highlighted its concerns regarding the threats, firstly, to our diplomats, our temples, our individuals, and Canada's, implicit support to extremists on its territory. Okay, so we are looking at drug syndicates, all of that together that have been communicated to the Canadian Prime Minister. So what are the points of contention then? Number one, Canada's support to Khalistani extremists. Okay, just say if you go ahead and understand the history of Canada, right from say the Kanishka bombing issue, okay, from then on up until now, Canada may be accused, and those accusations may be on very sound grounds, that they play the double game. The duplicity is evident, okay, insofar as promoting secessionism in India by offering say moral and financial support to Khalistani extremists. Okay, the Brampton tableau, where a former Prime Minister of India was ghastly displayed, the murder scene was displayed, again that has been conveyed to the Canadian side. Okay, number three, and something that will not be included in your notes anywhere. So what you find, now this is a major area of concern, and this has two ramifications. Number one, I'll speak about both the security angle, and number two, the sovereignty angle. So I'll tell you what the whole angle is about. Canada denying visas for Indian security personnel. In the past, you have had say Indian citizens who have served say in the BSF, in CRPF, in the Indian Army, Air Force, all right. They have been denied visas for their visit to Canada. Now what is the Canadian logic? They ask these individuals, serving officers or say ex-officers and jawans of these institutions, to go ahead and put in the visa application form, well, what was their designation? Where did they serve? Did they serve in Jammu and Kashmir? Did they serve in northeast of India? Okay, what was the rank that they held? Now why is this asked by them? Why do the Canadians insist on this information? Why? Because eventually they link these officers and their conduct during the discharge of official duties to the human rights, the so-called human rights abuse and violations that are carried out. Okay. Now, the security concern, first let's understand that. Why should Canada ask this information? Please understand that the transfer posting of these officers and jawans that belong to these institutions is confidential, right? That is the sole prerogative of the Republic of India and no one else, which is what again has been conveyed to the Canadian side. At the same time, asking this information and thereby using it as a ground to deny visa is also a direct attack on the sovereignty of India. Okay, so this has been a primary bone of contention between India and Canada over the years. Obviously, the Canadian support to Khalistani extremists, the whole attack or say the threat that is now posed to the Indian diplomats on Canadian soil, on American soil, obviously is well known. But this is another facet that needs the attention of the more aware, the discerning UPSC aspirant. Okay, and obviously the others, the places of worship and temples getting vandalized and defaced, that has been communicated to the Canadian side in very clear terms. Okay, so this is the India-Canada relation that are now seeing a new low because of what can possibly be understood as Canada misconstruing two facts: that the majority and the extremists are not a singular group. Okay, that the Sikh population in Canada, their sentiments towards India are wholly different from this sentiment of this minority of extremists who harbor a deep anti-India sentiment. And thus, their actions, their promoting violence and issuing threats should not be construed as the sentiment of the majority of the Sikh community. In fact, if the Canadian Prime Minister were to read his own newspapers, he would have understood that his own newspapers carried the poll wherein the majority of the Sikh population, the Sikh diaspora in fact, in Canada harbors a lot of love for India. And thus, by conflating this love with the whole sentiment of anti-India Khalistani protesters, the extremists, that is the Canadian mistake, which is why you find that the India-Canada relationship is now seeing a new low. Okay, which is why, again, the effects of that were seen this year in the G20 summit, wherein no particular bilateral was offered to the Canadian Prime Minister. And yesterday evening at 7:05 p.m., this particular press release issued by the government of India in no clear terms saying the bones of contention, the points of friction that are between India and Canada. So, very important press release from the mains perspective. Something that ought to be included. A lot of fodder points that come out of this brief but very cold press release by the government of India. Okay, so that was the India-Canada relations. And well, here is where you find the PDF, my friends. The PDF of this entire lecture available on this Telegram channel at 12 noon. Okay, just for today, I have overlooked the questions because the focus should be on understanding the topics. The questions will be following on my Telegram channel afternoon. And before I wrap up, let's look at the questions from the last class where we discussed G20 Sherpas in detail. Okay, so let's look at G20. G20 can be best categorized as what? Group of underdeveloped and developing nations, exclusive forum of the Global South, forum for economic cooperation, none of the above. Well, what you find is that, well, essentially, this was the birth, the genesis of G20. And now its ambit, its scope has expanded to say include not just economic cooperation. You're also looking at, say, security issues that are addressed by it, environmental issues that are also addressed by it. Okay, so obviously the ambit has increased, but it can still be best described as a forum for economic cooperation, which is why you find that the IMEEC that has come out of the G20, now G21, okay, is of prime importance for us to understand. Let's look at question B. Which of the following is not a member of G20? Right? Germany, Saudi, Mexico, all of the above are members. Well, those of you who are watching me live, why don't you let me know the answer to this? Quickly let me know the answer to question B in the chat. For those of you who are watching me live, I'd most appreciate it. Okay, let's look at question C. Indonesia is the next president of the G20. Well, no. It was the previous president of the G20. In fact, yesterday, as soon as the New Delhi summit concluded, you had the Indian Prime Minister who offered the gavel. The gavel was passed over to the Brazilian President Lula. Okay, which means Brazil is the next host of the G20 in 2024. Okay, this gavel symbolizes the transfer of presidency from one country to the other. Okay, so up until now, the gavel was with the Indian government. Now that has been offered to the Brazilian president, which means Brazil is the next president of the G20. So, well, incorrect again. This is the next president. And G20 does not have a permanent secretariat is absolutely correct. There is no permanent secretariat. There is a roving secretariat for G20, which means the president, the presidency of the nation, the capital of that nation becomes the secretariat. Okay. All are a part of G20. Absolutely correct. Correct, guys. Thank you for your answers. Neighbor, Pranjal, good, good. So the incorrect statements here being A and B. Right? G20 was founded in 1999 as a forum of finance ministers and central bank governors to discuss global financial issues after the Asian crisis. Okay, you had the Asian crisis that developed in 1999, and after that, you had the G20 that came up as a forum for all these ministers, all these central bank governors to come together and address the economic issues. Okay, now after the 2007 and 8 economic crisis, what you essentially found was that the G20 was upgraded. Okay, and it was upgraded to become a representative body of heads of nations. Up until 2007 and 8, it was only a body of the finance ministers and the central bank governors. So the correct statements here being both. Right? Let's go forward. India is not a member of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, correct? To be a member of the NSG, member states need to sign the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. Now, what you find is that the NPT has been a bone of contention between India and the West. Okay, And thus, because India has not signed the NPT so far, India has not been, say, addressed or given allowed to be in the NSG. Okay, so here you find that all the statements are true. Okay, let's look at the last question. What is ISRU related to? Now, last question, discussion, we took a deep dive into Project Moxie by NASA, which essentially looks and has done, it has created oxygen on Martian surface, and the way it has done is on the ISRU principle. What does ISRU stand for? In situ resource utilization. Okay, Ulfat, good morning, good morning. Okay, in situ resource utilization essentially means that on the surface of the Mars, you are going to use the resources available on the surface of the Mars to go ahead and create oxygen. Why? Because first, it can be used as a fuel, and number two, because it can be used for respiration. So eventually, if Martian, say, colony have to be developed, oxygen is the first requirement that is necessary. So the NASA's MOXIE project has gone ahead and created 121 grams of oxygen, which is twice the goal that NASA had. Okay. Now, what is the process that was so employed? You will go ahead and let me know, because we had discussed it in the last class. So the options that I have for you, whether it used the electrolysis process, whether it used a chemical process, whether it split oxygen atom, or none of the above. Let me know the answers in the chat box. Okay. Very, very important again from the examination perspective that you understand and grasp the process that was employed by NASA to create oxygen on the Martian surface. Okay, so that concludes my questions for the day. Now, these are my individuals: Shubham, Ulfat, Raghu, Pooja, Pradeep, Be Live Facts, Crystal, Pranjul, Tanu, Lekam, Ruby, Ashlekha, Asha, Vinay, Coder, Karuna, Honey, Your Neighbor, Ayush, Aditya, Rahul, Akshay, and Frown Clown. Guys, thank you so much firstly. Okay, you might have got one or two questions incorrect. That's immaterial. But what's more important is that you are taking effort in understanding and answering the questions. And even though I do not have any questions for you today, the questions will be, say, uploaded on my Telegram channel afternoon. But please go ahead and answer those questions. Okay. Eventually, you are selected or rejected based on your ability to solve questions. Okay. And that is the primary requirement that a student needs to focus on and work on right from day one. Just mere studying of the book, mere studying of the article will get you nowhere. You can have my word on it. Right? Okay. That concludes this class for today. Very short class where we discussed IMEEC. We discussed in detail, also looked at the Konark Wheel. And third is where we discussed and understood the whole concept of the India-Canada relations. Okay. That concludes it, guys. I'll see you tomorrow morning, 6:30 a.m. with another set of important topics. Most likely, we'll take a look at the Global Biofuel Alliance that has been also announced during the New Delhi Declaration Summit. Okay. And we'll also look to understand the African Union. And please understand that the IMEEC, now that African Union is a part of G20, that day is not far when you're also looking at another trade corridor that is going to be created between, say, India and Africa. Because, Africa is the next playground for all the global superpowers. With that on that note, it's a wrap. Till I see you tomorrow morning, 6:30 a.m. on StudyIQ IAS English.